I would like to say thanks to the organizer for inviting me to the Basque Country. Never in my life did I think I would be invited to give a talk in the Basque Country because Basque and Hokkien, sitting on the far end of the Eurasian continent, don't seem to have anything in common except for the word tea, like the tea that you drink, which Basque borrowed from Hokkien. These two languages finally come together because they are being endangered, which is clearly not something worth celebrating. A couple of days ago, Benyat sent me a list of questions to answer. One of the questions asked was about Hokkien being a minority language. This question made me ponder for a bit because Hokkien is actually not a minority language. It's actually the majority's language. It is also the lingua franca for many places where it is now being endangered. So it is, throughout this year, it has become minoritized for some reasons that I will be discussing in this talk. Let me quote Bernard Spolsky, a prominent linguist in the field of language planning. He's a sociolinguist. He says, belief about language are a fundamental factor in success in language rescue. For a shift of languages regularly depends on value attributed to competing varieties. Those who speak a particular language, when, where, how, and why, in a multilingual society are often driven by belief. Some people argue that young people don't like to speak it because it isn't cool or because the school doesn't teach it. But the language being not cool or not being taught in school are not the causes of its decline. They're actually the symptoms. In this presentation, I'm going to address the causes of the decline, which are also applicable to most non-Mandarin Chinese languages within and outside China. Before I start, I'm going to give an overview of the presentation, which will be divided into 5 chapters. So these are the 5 chapters I'm going to talk about. So I will give a wrap up and all the important points after every chapter so you understand the main points. Now I would like to get everyone familiarize themselves with the geography and profile of countries in East Asia. Japan is on the far northeast. Korea is next to it. China is a vast country. Hokkien is spoken actually at the bottom on the far southeast of China. And the people there migrated out of the place of origin about 17th century to Taiwan and Southeast Asia, like the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Brunei, Thailand as well, Burma as well. So they are scattered around Southeast Asia. And something else of interest before we begin. This is a manuscript written by Melchor de Manzano in 1620, who is a mission to Manila from Villascusa de Aro in Cuenca, a town 150 kilometers outside Madrid. This manuscript is called Arte de la Lengua Jiu-Jiu. It's one of the dialect of Hokkien. It was written based on Hokkien spoken by Hokkien people living in the Philippines. It's now being kept at the University of Barcelona. So I will talk about Chinese languages and their writing system. Hokkien is a Sino-Tibetan language. Sino-Tibetan language can be divided into several groups. The red one is the Chinese language. The yellow one is the Tibetan language. The green one is Burmese. The brown one is Quranic languages scattered on the border between Thailand and Burma. Linguists generally compare the spoken Chinese languages to the entire branch of Germanic or Latin languages. Please note that each color represents a group of different languages. Speakers from within the same color don't necessarily understand each other. And diversity peaks in the province of Guangdong and Fujian. In the blue, orange, and pink areas, that's the place where the diversity is the highest. So how do spoken languages interface with the writing system? A quick answer to that is that all these languages share the same writing system, but with different characters. Similar to how Latin languages share the same alphabet, but use different spellings. The spoken form of the word slippery are very different in Mandarin, Hokkien, and Cantonese. What is interesting is that the perception of difference between Chinese languages is obscured because of the sharing of characters. It is not surprising that some linguists believe the logographic writing system inhibits the awareness of their differences. I'm going to talk about the history of Chinese writing system, so I would like to do a quick experiment. Here's one sentence written in 5 different languages: in Spanish, in Catalan, in French, Italian, Portuguese. Imagine the words in both are represented by just one character. Would you think these 5 languages are the same language? To understand why this is, we need to look at the history of the evolution of Chinese characters. Chinese characters in the early formation period were mainly pictographic and ideographic, based on the right drawing of concrete images. At the top part of the chart are characters written about 3,500 years ago, and then they gradually evolve to the modern version at the bottom. Notice how they begin very literal and become more abstract throughout the year. However, it is difficult to represent abstract concept by creating characters on this principle. This leads to the prevalence of phono-semantic compound, which are the characters formed by one semantic part and one phonological part. The left-hand side shows 3 drops of water. Like, for example, the water spill on the floor. Isn't it slippery if you have water there? So that's how it comes from. On the right-hand side, the character for bone, which is pronounced as good, a very low tone, good. And then they take the sound of bone and combine it with water to denote a new word called good. Good is slippery. So the combining the phonetic and semantic parts become an important method for the people in East Asia to create new characters. Although they are not alphabetical, most Chinese characters do contain sound properties. We can see how people in different places in East Asia use this strategy to create new characters to write their own language later on. Now we know that about the Chinese characters, so we proceed with the grammar. One thing is about diglossia. I have to explain. Diglossia means there are 2 languages used within the community for 2 different purposes. So if you use, for example, in the past people use Latin to write, and when they speak a local language, for example, Spanish or Italian. So for thousands of years, classical Chinese was like the Latin of East Asia. It is an archaic language with its grammatical structure very different from contemporary languages. It was used to write all official documents in China, in Japan, in Korea, and in Vietnam. So what about unofficial language, unofficial writing? There were other forms of writing which are grammatically more similar to the colloquial languages. The people throughout East Asia used a phono-semantic compound strategy that I mentioned just now to create colloquial characters that they can put the sound of their colloquial language in writing. The second strategy was to repurpose the existing characters found in the classical text to denote other meaning in the colloquial language. So these 2 are the most common strategy that people use. This is a photo I took in the Temple of Literature in Hanoi, Vietnam. The word written there are not Chinese, they're actually Vietnamese. Here are two Vietnamese characters. These are typical examples of phono-semantic compound. One side denotes the sound and the other side denotes the meaning. These are Mandarin examples. The meaning of the character on the left means the arrow's target in the classical language, but Mandarin speakers use the character for its sound to denote a grammatical word in Mandarin. On the right hand side, the character for horse is added with a square to denote a grammatical word in Mandarin. These are two examples of famous novels written in Mandarin. Every Chinese person would have learned these fictions in school. And then these are Hokkien examples. The meaning of the characters on the left means the sleeve of a shirt in the classical language, but Hokkien speakers use the character for its sound to denote a word cannot in Hokkien. It's called Bei. This is a theatre play written in Hokkien. This was written in 1566. But not many people know about it because the school today never teach anything about Hokkien. The education system is very much skewed towards Mandarin. Hokkien literature or history about Hokkien have been excluded from the education system. These are Cantonese characters. All these characters I mentioned so far were regarded as lowly. That is to say, these are used for fiction, novel, theatre, plays only. You don't write this in school. These characters are not taught in school at all. In the case of Korea, King Sejong the Great of Korea wanted to break away from the Chinese character completely. Therefore, he invented alphabetic script called the Hangul or Chosungu in 1433. This is the book he wrote to encourage his citizens to adopt his writing system to replace classical Chinese. However, due to the prestige of the classical language, it took several centuries for this writing system to become popular. To summarize, the classical Chinese gives a prestigious writing system. Everyone in East Asia used classical Chinese as a starting point and alter or manipulate the characters to suit their local language. All these varieties of written languages were of equal status. They were all regarded as lowly, and they were all used in novel, fiction, or anything unofficial. But then, things started to change in 1876. This brings us to the rise of Mandarin. In 1876, the first Mandarin newspaper called the People's Newspaper was published in order to reach out to people who haven't mastered the classical Chinese grammar. During this period, China lost a war to Japan, and the ruling elite suddenly realized that they were technologically backward. Since then, there was an explosion of publication in the colloquial language as a means to educate the masses. This is the period when written Mandarin gradually increased its status to replace classical Chinese. However, it doesn't mean that non-Mandarin languages in the south, like Hokkien or Teochew or Cantonese, did not have newspapers published in their own languages. These are two examples of newspapers printed in Cantonese and Teochew, which are the languages in the south. During this period, there was no definite answer to what constitutes a written vernacular. Anything non-classical Chinese can be considered a vernacular publication. But this southern publication did not gain as much influence as Mandarin because of relatively small population size and the readership. In 1919, Mandarin finally replaced classical Chinese as the official written language. However, Mandarin wasn't popular in the south. There was no agreement on how to pronounce Mandarin characters. Some linguists even created artificial pronunciation that combined northern and southern phonological properties. During this period, people in the south carried on reading Mandarin Chinese text in their own southern pronunciation as if they were reading classical Chinese text. This situation continued until 1956 when the State Council announced that everyone in China should read Mandarin text in Mandarin pronunciation. Interestingly, Hong Kong, under the British rule, wasn't affected by the ruling. After Mandarin superseded and replaced classical Chinese, become the national language, Hong Kong, although a modern city, still has a diglossic situation where the written language is Mandarin and the spoken language is Cantonese. Linguistically speaking, it is the most traditional place in southern China. As I've presented previously, these are the Cantonese characters people would write in unofficial text, like in SMS, WhatsApp, Facebook posts, comic or novel. Due to the diglossic situation, despite the spoken language having a different grammar, everyone has to write in Mandarin. In Mandarin, the adjective comes before an animal, and in Cantonese, the adjective comes after the animal. But in writing, the Hong Kong people have to follow the Mandarin grammatical rule shown by the red arrow at the top. Remember that I said the rule that everyone should read Mandarin text in Mandarin pronunciation wasn't applied in Hong Kong. So Hong Kong people are still reading Mandarin, but pronouncing it in Cantonese. So let's do a quick experiment to give a clearer idea of what people in Hong Kong are actually doing in this situation. Let's say the Portuguese language became the national language of Spain, for example. People in Spain would have written Portuguese even while speaking Spanish in everyday life. I would like to ask Benya to read this Portuguese sentence in Spanish pronunciation.
Estou a ler uma frase em português na pronúncia espanhola.
So it doesn't make sense, right? This is a Portuguese text, but he read it in Spanish. So this is what happened in Hong Kong when everyone reads Mandarin text and they pronounce it in the Cantonese or their local accent. Now you may think Mandarin has become a prestigious language after becoming the national language, but this is not necessarily the case. Up until 1956, or up until today in the case of Hong Kong, people in the South still hold on the pronunciation of southern languages, even the written language is Mandarin. The reason is that the southern Chinese languages has the prestige. People in the South used to take pride for retaining the phonemic properties in the language that have been lost in Mandarin. Syllables ending with up, at, all these sounds have been lost in Mandarin but retained in the southern languages. And many rhyme dictionaries written 1,000 years ago have rich records of ancient Chinese spoken in the past. So people see Mandarin as a language that has lost the essence of real Chinese language. So even well-off families in the north would hire teachers from the south to teach their children the southern pronunciation in the past. And interestingly, Mandarin was deemed so ugly and ludicrous. Even the Mandarin opera artists had to alter their pronunciation to mimic the sound described in the rhyme dictionary where they performed. However, from 1956 onwards, the Chinese government issued a directive to instruct all schools in the South to teach Mandarin pronunciation. That's when Southern pronunciation lost its legitimacy. So in this chapter, we have learned that Southern languages lost the battle slowly on two fronts. One, when the classical Chinese writing system, which the Southern languages borrowed from so heavily, was replaced with Mandarin, and they became seen as secondary. Secondly, once Mandarin was established, become a national language, it became absurd to continue to read Mandarin with a Southern pronunciation. In this chapter, I'm going to briefly discuss about another issue which is related to linguistic taxonomy. Most linguists categorize languages similar to how biologists categorize species in the natural world. Prior to 1920, there was no scientific research on language taxonomy in China. There was no systematic research on language variation or grammar either. Chinese people simply call any languages which are not language of the imperial court as Fangyan. These two characters merely mean a language of a particular region. Even French, Dutch, Spanish, or maybe Basque were referred to as Fangyan in the past. Since Chinese had no equivalents for the terminology in modern linguistic taxonomy, like family, group, branch, language, dialect, subdialect, they had to import modern linguistic science through Japan because many modern linguistic concepts have already been translated into Japanese. That happened around 1927 and 1928. Unfortunately, the Japanese used the same character, the same word, which is pronounced as Hogen in Japanese to mean dialect. During this importation, Chinese borrowed the word verbatim without much adjustment. Since then, Fangyan has acquired a new meaning, but the habit of calling non-Mandarin Chinese languages as Fangyan hasn't changed. This has resulted in a widespread misunderstanding that Southern Chinese languages are subset or dialects of Mandarin. This confusion has been used by some government and nationalists to denigrate Hokkien or Southern languages to deter people from speaking it or using their own language. This is a photo of how nationalists in Taiwan suppressed the use of Hokkien. This banner in a school says, "I speak the national language and I don't speak dialect." After a long suppression of Hokkien language in Taiwan, the language has been on a steady decline. The blue line shows the rise of Mandarin, while the green line shows the gradual decline of Hokkien use. And the same happened in Singapore in 1979. The Prime Minister of Singapore launched a campaign called the Speak Mandarin Campaign to discourage the use of Hokkien and other Southern languages, also referring to them as dialects. Hokkien, alongside other Southern languages, were banned on national media in order to ensure everyone spoke Mandarin. This policy persists even until today. To understand the seriousness of this, imagine any government of Europe labeling French, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian as dialects of the Spanish language and banning them to ensure everyone speaks Spanish. Think of the culture that would be lost through such an act. Due to Singapore being a city-state, a small country, and relatively low population size, Southern Chinese languages sustained a dramatic decline from a 60% of youth who use the language at home to almost non-existent in 2009. Fujian, which is the place of origin of Hokkien in the southern China, Hokkien has no official status in this region, as it's still perceived as a dialect. The biggest threat to the survival of Hokkien, among others, in its place of origin is the overzealous promotion of Mandarin and migration of non-Hokkien speakers into the heartland. The Hokkien-speaking environment in urban areas is being lost, and the trend is set to spread to rural areas. In Malaysia, parents who speak Hokkien to their children are very rare, extremely rare. There are no school teaching in Hokkien as a medium of instruction. There are no newspapers printing in Hokkien. There's only one Hokkien TV channel, but most of the TV hosts cannot speak fluent Hokkien. They often have to switch into Mandarin when they can't express themselves. By contrast, Basque probably has a better position than Hokkien nowadays. So that concludes the history of how we arrive at this point in time, and hopefully that has given everyone some food for thought.